My boyfriend's sister is obsessed with him, and I'm starting to think she's in love with him. What I discovered about their relationship made me question everything I thought I knew about family boundaries, and the confrontation that followed changed our lives forever. My name is Chloe, and I'm 20 years old. For the past 3 years, I've been dating Ethan, who's 19, and I thought I had found my person. We met during my sophomore year of college at a bookstore near campus where he worked part-time. I was searching for a specific textbook for my literature class, completely lost in the maze of academic books, when he appeared beside me with an offer to help. Ethan had this quiet confidence that drew me in immediately. While helping me locate my book, we discovered we both loved the same obscure poetry collections. He recommended a book I'd never heard of, and when I read it that night, I understood exactly why he thought I'd connect with it. That kind of intuitive understanding of who I was felt rare and precious. Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Ethan ordered spaghetti and somehow managed to eat it without making a mess, which impressed me more than it probably should have. We talked about our families, our dreams, and the books that had shaped us. He told me about growing up with his older sister Vivian, who was 25 and worked as a marketing coordinator for a local firm. From the way he described her, she sounded protective and caring, maybe a little intense, but nothing that raised any red flags. Those early months felt like discovering a hidden treasure. Ethan would surprise me with little notes tucked into my textbooks, quotes from poets we discussed or silly drawings that made me laugh during boring lectures. We'd spend hours walking around campus, talking about everything and nothing. He had this way of making ordinary moments feel magical, like when we got caught in a rainstorm and instead of running for cover, we danced in the empty parking lot until we were both soaked and laughing. When Ethan first introduced me to his family, I was nervous but excited. His parents, David and Janet, welcomed me warmly into their suburban home with its perfectly manicured lawn and family photos covering every surface. The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, and Janet immediately offered me homemade cookies and coffee. She asked about my major, my family, and my plans after graduation with genuine interest. Vivian was different from what I'd expected. She was undeniably beautiful, with long dark hair and striking green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But there was an intensity in how she looked at Ethan that made me slightly uncomfortable, though I couldn't pinpoint why. During dinner, she kept steering the conversation back to memories she shared with Ethan, stories from their childhood that excluded everyone else at the table. "Remember when we used to build those elaborate blanket forts in the living room?" she'd say, laughing and touching his arm. We'd spend entire weekends in there, just the two of us, pretending we were explorers in some magical kingdom. Ethan would smile politely but seemed eager to change the subject. I attributed Vivian's behavior to normal sibling nostalgia and didn't think much of it initially. After all, they'd grown up together, and it made sense that they'd have inside jokes and shared memories. The first real sign that something was off came about 6 months into our relationship. Ethan and I were at the movies, completely absorbed in the film, when his phone started buzzing incessantly. He ignored it initially, but the vibrations became so frequent and distracting that other moviegoers started looking our way with annoyance. Finally, Ethan checked his phone during a quiet scene. His face went pale as he scrolled through what appeared to be dozens of text messages. "It's Vivian," he whispered. "She's been calling and texting for the past hour." The messages I glimpsed over his shoulder were frantic. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? I need to talk to you right now. This is important." Each message became more urgent than the last. Ethan excused himself to call her back, leaving me alone in the theater feeling confused and slightly hurt. When he returned 20 minutes later, he looked stressed and apologetic. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, she had a bad day at work and needed someone to talk to," he explained, but something in his tone suggested there was more to it. That incident started a pattern I began to notice more frequently. Vivian would contact Ethan at the most inconvenient times, during our study sessions, our dates, even late at night when we were just hanging out watching Netflix. At first, Ethan would answer immediately, dropping whatever we were doing to respond to her calls or texts. But as time went on, I could see the stress it was causing him. "She's just going through a rough patch," he'd say when I finally brought it up. "She broke up with her boyfriend a few months ago, and she's been having trouble adjusting." I wanted to be understanding. Breakups were hard, and if Vivian needed family support, I didn't want to be the girlfriend who caused problems. But the frequency and urgency of her communication seemed excessive, even for someone going through a difficult time. The physical boundaries began to blur in ways that made me deeply uncomfortable. During family gatherings, Vivian would position herself next to Ethan on the couch, often leaning against him or playing with his hair while they watched movies. She had this habit of calling him pet names that seemed more appropriate for a romantic partner than a sister. "My love, can you help me reach something from the top shelf?" she'd ask, even though she was tall enough to get it herself. "Sweetheart, do you want some more coffee?" she'd offer, bringing him his cup exactly the way he liked it without him asking. When I mentioned these interactions to my roommate, Jessica, she raised her eyebrows. "That does sound a little weird," she agreed. "I mean, I love my brother, but I don't call him my love or pet his hair." The breaking point came during a particularly uncomfortable evening at their house. Ethan and I were in his childhood bedroom, lying on his bed and watching a documentary for one of his history classes. The door was open, as per his parents' house rules, and we were simply enjoying each other's company in the innocent way college couples do. Vivian appeared in the doorway without knocking, which was already a boundary violation. She was wearing a silk nightgown that seemed entirely too revealing for family interaction, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. "My love," she said to Ethan, completely ignoring my presence, "your phone is about to die. I thought you might want to plug it in." She walked over to his side of the bed and handed him the charger, but instead of leaving immediately, she sat down on the edge of the bed next to him. The mattress dipped under her weight, causing Ethan to roll slightly toward her. "Thanks, Viv," he said, clearly uncomfortable but trying to maintain normalcy. But instead of getting up, Vivian reached out and began running her fingers through his hair, the same way I often did when we were being intimate. "You need a haircut," she said softly, her voice taking on a tone I recognized as flirtatious. "I could trim it for you like I used to when we were kids." Ethan gently pulled away from her touch. "I'm good, thanks. Chloe and I are trying to watch this documentary for my class." Only then did Vivian acknowledge my presence, giving me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, right. I forgot you were here." The dismissive tone in her voice made it clear that my presence was unwelcome. She finally stood up but lingered for another moment, her hand resting on Ethan's shoulder in a possessive gesture that made my stomach churn. After she left, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Ethan seemed tense and distant, and I felt like an intruder in what was supposed to be our shared space. "Does she always touch you like that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, the same spot where Vivian's fingers had been moments before. "She's always been affectionate. That's just how she is. But doesn't it make you uncomfortable? The way she looks at you, the things she calls you." "She's my sister, Chloe. She's not some random girl hitting on me. You're reading too much into it." His defensive tone told me this conversation was going nowhere, so I dropped it for the moment. But something had shifted in my understanding of their relationship, and I couldn't ignore what I was seeing anymore. The surveillance aspect of Vivian's behavior became more apparent as our relationship progressed. Ethan had shared his location with family members for safety reasons, which seemed normal enough. But Vivian used this access in ways that crossed every reasonable boundary. We'd be at a restaurant, enjoying dinner and conversation, when Vivian would suddenly appear with some excuse about being in the neighborhood. The first time it happened, I thought it was a coincidence. The second time, I started to suspect otherwise. By the third time, it was impossible to deny that she was tracking his whereabouts and showing up wherever we were. "How did you know we were here?" Ethan would ask, and Vivian would always have some plausible explanation. "I was meeting a friend nearby and saw your car in the parking lot," or "Mom asked me to drop something off at your apartment, and I saw you weren't home, so I figured you might be here." The explanations were always just believable enough to avoid direct confrontation, but the pattern was unmistakable. Vivian was monitoring Ethan's location and inserting herself into our private moments whenever possible. The passive-aggressive messages became more frequent and more pointed. If Ethan spent time with friends, Vivian would send texts like, "Thanks for the invite," or "Nice to know where I stand in your priorities." When he started a new job at a local electronics store and became busier with work and school, the messages intensified. "I guess your new job is more important than family," she wrote after he missed a family dinner because of a shift change. "Remember when you used to care about the people who love you?" came another message when he didn't immediately respond to her call. These messages would put Ethan in a difficult position. He felt guilty for not being available enough for his family, but he also needed to build his own life and maintain his relationship with me. Vivian seemed determined to make him choose, and she wasn't shy about expressing her disapproval when his choices didn't center around her. The situation reached a new level of bizarre when Vivian started involving their mother, Janet, in her grievances. If Ethan didn't respond to Vivian's calls quickly enough, or if he spent too many evenings with me instead of at home, Janet would call to express concern about his changed behavior. "Your mother is worried about you," became a frequent refrain in Vivian's arsenal. "She thinks you're pulling away from the family." These conversations would leave Ethan feeling frustrated and manipulated, but he struggled to articulate exactly what was wrong with the situation. How do you explain that your sister's love feels suffocating without sounding ungrateful or cruel? The 4th of July incident was a turning point that made Vivian's possessiveness impossible to ignore. Ethan and I had gone to a friend's barbecue party, where he'd had more to drink than usual. He wasn't dangerously intoxicated, just tipsy and more affectionate than normal, which I found endearing rather than concerning. When we got back to his apartment, I helped him get settled, bringing him water and making sure he was comfortable. We were laughing about something silly from the party when his phone rang. It was Vivian. "Where is he?" she demanded when I answered, not bothering with pleasantries. "He's fine, Vivian. We just got back from Jake's barbecue. He had a few beers, but he's okay. I'm coming over." "That's really not necessary. I'm taking care of him. He's my brother. I'll decide what's necessary." The line went dead, and 15 minutes later, Vivian was pounding on the apartment door. When I opened it, she pushed past me without invitation and went straight to Ethan, who was lying on the couch watching television. "Are you okay?" she asked, kneeling beside him and placing her hand on his forehead as if checking for fever. "You sounded strange on the phone earlier." "I'm fine, Viv. Chloe's been taking great care of me." But Vivian acted as if I wasn't there. She bustled around the apartment, bringing him different snacks, adjusting his pillows, and hovering over him like a concerned mother rather than a sister. Her behavior was so over the top that even Ethan seemed embarrassed. "You really don't need to stay," he told her. "Chloe and I were just going to watch a movie and then go to bed." The mention of us going to bed together seemed to trigger something in Vivian. Her expression hardened, and she turned to face me directly for the first time since arriving. "I think I should stay tonight, just to make sure he's okay. You never know with alcohol poisoning." "He had 3 beers, Vivian, not 3 bottles of vodka," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Better safe than sorry. I'll take the couch." The standoff that followed was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. Vivian was clearly determined to insert herself between Ethan and me, using his slightly intoxicated state as justification. Ethan, caught between his sister and his girlfriend, seemed paralyzed by the awkwardness of the situation. Finally, I made the decision to leave. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," I told Ethan, kissing his forehead before gathering my things. As I walked to my car, I could hear Vivian through the window, already settling into her caretaker role with an enthusiasm that seemed entirely disproportionate to the situation. The location sharing issue came to a head the following week when Ethan finally decided he needed more privacy. The constant surveillance was affecting our relationship and his mental health, so he turned off the location sharing feature on his phone. Vivian's reaction was explosive. Within hours of discovering she could no longer track his whereabouts, she was calling frantically, demanding he turn it back on. "What if something happens to you?" she argued. "What if you're in an accident and we can't find you?" "Vivian, millions of people manage to live their lives without sharing their location with family members every minute of every day," Ethan replied, his patience finally wearing thin. "But we're not just any family. We're close. We look out for each other." The conversation devolved into Vivian crying and accusing Ethan of shutting her out and choosing his girlfriend over family. She called their parents, portraying herself as the victim of Ethan's sudden coldness and insensitivity. Janet called Ethan later that evening, expressing concern about Vivian's emotional state and asking what had happened to cause such a rift. The pressure from his mother to make things right with Vivian was immense, and I could see how much it was affecting him. "Maybe I should just turn the location back on," he said to me that night. "It's not worth all this drama." "But you shouldn't have to live under surveillance to keep peace in your family," I replied. "That's not normal, Ethan. Sisters don't typically need to know their brother's exact location at all times." The conversation that followed was the first time Ethan really acknowledged that Vivian's behavior was problematic. He'd been so accustomed to her intensity that he'd normalized what was actually quite controlling and inappropriate behavior. "I love her, and I know she loves me," he said. "But sometimes it feels like she loves me too much, in a way that makes me uncomfortable." That admission was progress, but it didn't immediately solve the problem. Vivian continued to push boundaries, test limits, and find new ways to insert herself into our relationship. The confrontation with their parents happened on a warm evening in late summer. Ethan and I had been invited to dinner, ostensibly to celebrate his recent promotion at work. But it became clear early in the evening that we'd been summoned for a different purpose entirely. Vivian had apparently spent weeks building her case against me, painting me as a negative influence who was driving a wedge between Ethan and his family. She'd catalogued every missed family dinner, every time he'd chosen to spend time with me instead of at home, every sign that his priorities were shifting away from family-centered activities. "We're just concerned that you're losing yourself in this relationship," Janet began gently. "You used to be so present with the family, and now it feels like we barely see you." David nodded in agreement. "Your sister is worried that this girl is changing you, making you less available to the people who love you." The way they referred to me as "this girl" while I sat right there was particularly stinging. I wasn't some random person Ethan had just started dating. I'd been part of their lives for 3 years. "Chloe isn't changing me," Ethan replied, his voice steady but tense. "I'm growing up. I'm building an adult life that includes work, school, friends, and yes, a serious relationship. That's what people my age do." Vivian, who had been unusually quiet throughout the dinner, finally spoke up. "But you're forgetting about the people who were there for you before she came along. Family should come first, Ethan. Always." The possessiveness in her voice was unmistakable, and for the first time, I saw Ethan's parents exchange a glance that suggested they were beginning to see what I'd been seeing all along. "Vivian," David said carefully, "Ethan is entitled to have a girlfriend. It's normal for young people to form serious romantic relationships. But does it have to be her?" Vivian shot back, not even bothering to hide her hostility anymore. "She's changing him, making him selfish and inconsiderate." The mask had finally slipped completely. Vivian wasn't concerned about Ethan's relationship with the family in general, she was specifically threatened by his relationship with me. Her jealousy and possessiveness were now obvious to everyone in the room. Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is exactly why I've been pulling back," he said, his voice rising slightly. "Because every time I try to have a normal adult relationship, it turns into this interrogation about my loyalty to the family." "Ethan, please sit down," Janet pleaded. "We can work this out." "No, Mom, we can't work this out as long as everyone expects me to choose between having a girlfriend and keeping Vivian happy. Those shouldn't be mutually exclusive things, but somehow they are in this family." The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian's face was flushed with anger and what looked like genuine hurt, but there was something else there too, a kind of desperation that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "Choose her. But don't expect me to just watch while you throw away everything we've always meant to each other." The phrasing of that statement, "everything we've always meant to each other," hung in the air like a confession. It sounded less like a sister mourning the loss of closeness with her brother and more like a woman mourning the loss of a romantic relationship. Ethan seemed to hear it too, because his expression shifted from anger to something closer to horror. "Vivian, what exactly do you think we've meant to each other?" But she was already gathering her purse and heading for the door, tears streaming down her face. "Forget it," she called over her shoulder. "Just forget everything." The aftermath of that dinner was a period of tense family dynamics and difficult conversations. Ethan's parents were clearly processing what they'd witnessed, trying to reconcile their image of Vivian as a caring sister with the possessive, jealous behavior they'd finally seen clearly. Janet called me a few days later, something that had never happened before in 3 years of dating her son. "Chloe, I owe you an apology," she began. "I think we've been blind to some concerning behavior, and I'm sorry you've had to deal with that without support from us." The conversation that followed was revelatory. Janet shared that she'd been receiving complaints from Vivian about me for months, detailed reports about how I was stealing Ethan and making him forget about family. At the time, these seemed like legitimate concerns from a sister who missed her brother. But in light of the dinner confrontation, Janet was reassessing everything. "I love both my children," she said, "but Vivian's attachment to Ethan has always been intense. When they were kids, she was extremely protective of him, almost maternal. We thought it was sweet then, but maybe we should have addressed it earlier." David had apparently had his own concerns over the years but hadn't known how to address them without seeming to criticize Vivian's love for her brother. The pet names, the physical affection, the possessiveness, individually, these things could be explained away as family closeness. Together, they painted a picture of inappropriate attachment. Ethan was struggling with the realization that his relationship with his sister had crossed boundaries he hadn't fully recognized before. The guilt was overwhelming. He felt responsible for enabling the behavior by not setting firmer limits earlier. "I keep thinking about all the times she touched me or said things that made me uncomfortable, but I told myself I was overreacting because she's my sister," he confided in me one evening. "But you're not supposed to feel uncomfortable with appropriate sibling affection, are you?" The question broke my heart because it revealed how much Vivian's behavior had affected his understanding of normal family relationships. He'd been gaslit into accepting inappropriate attention by being told it was just family love. We decided that Ethan needed to have a direct conversation with Vivian about boundaries, with his parents' support. The conversation took place at his parents' house on a Sunday afternoon, with Janet and David present to provide backup and ensure the discussion stayed productive. Vivian arrived looking defensive and hurt, clearly anticipating some kind of intervention. She sat across from Ethan at the kitchen table, her arms crossed and her jaw set in stubborn resistance. "Viv, we need to talk about boundaries," Ethan began gently. "The way you've been treating my relationship with Chloe isn't okay, and some of your behavior toward me has made me uncomfortable." "What behavior?" she demanded. "Loving my brother? Caring about his well-being? Sorry for not being one of those families who pretend to care about each other." "It's not about pretending, Vivian," David interjected. "It's about appropriate ways to show love and concern." Ethan took a deep breath before continuing. "The location tracking, the constant calls and texts when I'm with Chloe, showing up wherever we are without invitation, that's not normal sibling concern. That's controlling behavior. And the physical affection," Janet added quietly. "The way you touch Ethan, the names you call him, it's not appropriate for adult siblings." Vivian's face went through a series of expressions: anger, hurt, confusion, and finally something that looked like panic. "You're all ganging up on me," she said, her voice rising. "I'm the bad guy for loving my brother too much?" "There's no such thing as loving someone too much," Ethan replied, "but there are inappropriate ways to express that love. The jealousy, the possessiveness, trying to sabotage my relationship, that's not love, Vivian. That's something else." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Vivian's attachment to Ethan wasn't sisterly love, it was romantic obsession. Vivian stood up abruptly, her chair falling backward with a crash. "You want to know the truth," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Fine. I'll tell you the truth. You're the most important person in my life, Ethan. You always have been. When we were kids, I told myself it was because I was your big sister and it was my job to protect you. But it's more than that, and it always has been." The confession that followed was devastating in its honesty and disturbing in its implications. Vivian talked about how she'd never been interested in other guys because none of them measured up to Ethan. She described feeling physically sick when he started dating me, watching helplessly as the person she loved most chose someone else. "I know it's wrong," she cried. "I know sisters aren't supposed to feel this way about their brothers. But I can't help it. I've tried to date other people, tried to move on, but nothing works. You're everything to me, and watching you with her is killing me." The room was silent except for Vivian's sobs and the ticking of the kitchen clock. Janet had her hand pressed to her mouth in shock, while David looked like he might be sick. Ethan sat frozen, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Vivian," he finally whispered, "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll break up with her," Vivian begged, falling to her knees beside his chair. "Say you'll choose me. We could be so happy together, Ethan. We understand each other in ways nobody else ever will." The request was so inappropriate and desperate that it broke through Ethan's shock and into clear action. He stood up, gently but firmly removing Vivian's hands from his arms. "No," he said clearly. "I can't and won't do that. What you're asking for isn't possible or healthy, Vivian. You need professional help to work through these feelings." Vivian's breakdown that followed was heartbreaking to witness, even knowing how much pain her behavior had caused. She alternated between begging, anger, and promises to change if he would just give her a chance. Janet and David eventually had to physically escort Vivian from the house, promising to get her into therapy immediately. The conversation that followed focused on how to move forward as a family while protecting everyone's well-being. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and healing for everyone involved. Vivian moved back in with Janet and David temporarily while starting intensive therapy to address her inappropriate attachment to Ethan. The therapist explained that what Vivian was experiencing was a form of emotional incest, an unhealthy blurring of boundaries that can develop in families for various reasons. Ethan struggled with guilt and confusion, working through his own therapy to understand how the situation had developed and his role in it. He realized that he'd enabled some of Vivian's behavior by not setting firmer boundaries earlier, but his therapist helped him understand that as the younger sibling, it wasn't his responsibility to manage his sister's inappropriate feelings. "You were a child when this dynamic started," the therapist explained. "Children naturally trust their family members and assume that the way they're treated is normal. You couldn't have known to set boundaries against behavior you'd been conditioned to accept. Our relationship grew stronger through this crisis, though it wasn't easy. The stress of the family situation tested our communication skills and our commitment to each other. There were moments when I wondered if the drama would ever end, if Ethan would ever be fully free from his sister's obsession. But seeing how he handled the confrontation with Vivian, how he prioritized appropriate boundaries in our relationship even when it meant hurting someone he loved, showed me the kind of man he was. He chose what was right over what was easy, even when it broke his heart to do so. Vivian's therapy was a long process, and there were setbacks along the way. She initially resisted the therapist's assessment of her behavior, insisting that her feelings for Ethan were just extra strong sibling love. But as the sessions continued, she began to acknowledge the inappropriate nature of her attachment and work on understanding its origins. The therapist traced the issue back to childhood, when Vivian had taken on a caregiver role with Ethan after their father had a serious illness that required their mother's full attention. The parentification she experienced, combined with some attachment issues stemming from early childhood, had created an unhealthy dynamic that was never properly addressed. Understanding the roots of the problem didn't excuse Vivian's behavior, but it helped the family approach her recovery with compassion rather than just anger. She was genuinely struggling with feelings she couldn't control, even though the way she'd expressed those feelings was harmful to everyone involved. The path back to any kind of normal family relationship was slow and required careful boundaries. Vivian and Ethan couldn't have unsupervised contact during the early stages of her therapy. When they did interact, it was in structured settings with clear limits on physical affection and emotional intimacy. Holidays became complicated negotiations involving separate celebrations or carefully orchestrated gatherings with built-in safeguards. The spontaneous family dinners and casual get-togethers of the past were no longer possible, at least not while Vivian was working through her issues. For me, the experience was both validating and traumatizing. On one hand, having Vivian's behavior finally recognized and addressed by the family felt like vindication after years of being made to feel like I was overreacting. On the other hand, being the target of such intense jealousy and manipulation had taken a psychological toll that I hadn't fully recognized until it was over. I started my own therapy to process the experience and develop strategies for dealing with the ongoing family dynamics. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been the victim of a form of emotional abuse, being gaslit and manipulated by someone who saw me as an obstacle to her inappropriate desires. The most difficult part was learning to trust my instincts again. Vivian's behavior had been so effectively normalized by the family's initial response that I'd begun to doubt my own perceptions. Was her touching really inappropriate, or was I being jealous? Were her calls really excessive, or was I being selfish with my boyfriend's time? Having professionals validate that my concerns were legitimate and my reactions were normal helped me rebuild confidence in my ability to recognize unhealthy behavior. It was a skill that would serve me well in future relationships and life situations. Ethan's healing process was more complex because it involved grieving the loss of the sibling relationship he thought he had while also processing the realization that much of his childhood had been affected by inappropriate dynamics. He had to reframe years of memories through the lens of understanding Vivian's true feelings. I keep thinking about times when she would get upset if I brought friends over or wanted to hang out with other kids, he told me one evening. I thought she just wanted to spend time with me, but now I realize she was jealous of anyone who took my attention away from her. The therapy helped him understand that children in his situation often develop people-pleasing tendencies and difficulty setting boundaries because they've been conditioned to prioritize the inappropriate needs of the attached family member. His tendency to avoid conflict and try to keep everyone happy had roots in years of managing Vivian's emotional reactions. As Ethan worked through these issues, our relationship evolved and deepened. He became better at communicating his needs and setting boundaries, not just with family but in all areas of his life. The crisis had forced him to develop emotional skills that many people don't learn until much later in life, if at all. One of the most significant changes was his relationship with his parents. Janet and David were dealing with their own guilt about not recognizing and addressing Vivian's behavior earlier. They'd enabled the situation by treating her possessiveness as normal sibling closeness and by pressuring Ethan to accommodate her demands. "We thought we were raising our children to be close and supportive of each other," Janet confided to me during one of our conversations. "We never imagined that closeness could become unhealthy or that we'd need to set boundaries within the family." The family started attending group therapy sessions to learn healthier communication patterns and establish new boundaries that would protect everyone's well-being. It was awkward and difficult at first, but gradually they developed new ways of relating that didn't revolve around managing Vivian's emotions. The healing process wasn't linear, and there were setbacks along the way. Vivian had moments of regression where she would test boundaries or try to revert to old patterns. There were family gatherings that ended in tears and arguments, holidays that had to be canceled or modified, and periods where communication broke down completely. But there were also breakthrough moments that gave us hope. The first time Vivian genuinely apologized for the pain she'd caused me was a turning point. She acknowledged that her jealousy and possessiveness had been unfair and harmful, and she expressed genuine remorse for the way she'd treated both Ethan and me. "I know I can't undo the damage I've done," she said during a family therapy session about a year after the initial confrontation. "But I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. My feelings for Ethan were my problem to solve, not your problem to accommodate." The apology wasn't a magic solution that fixed everything immediately, but it was a sign that the therapy was working and that Vivian was developing healthier ways of understanding and expressing her emotions. As time passed, Vivian gradually built a life that didn't revolve around Ethan. She started dating someone she met in a support group for people dealing with attachment issues, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely interested in developing a romantic relationship with an appropriate partner. The change in her appearance and demeanor was remarkable. The intense, desperate energy that had characterized her interactions with Ethan was replaced by a calmer, more grounded presence. She started pursuing hobbies and interests that were entirely her own, not connected to her relationship with her brother. Ethan and I graduated from college and moved in together, a step that would have caused a family crisis during the height of Vivian's obsession but was now celebrated by his parents as a normal milestone in our relationship. We were able to have conversations about our future without worrying about how it would affect Vivian or whether she would try to sabotage our plans. The proposal came 2 years later, in the same bookstore where we'd first met. Ethan had arranged with the owner to hide the ring inside the same poetry book he'd recommended to me all those years ago. When I opened it and found the ring nestled between the pages, surrounded by the words that had first brought us together, it felt like the perfect symbol of our journey. Planning the wedding required careful navigation of family dynamics, but it was manageable in ways it never could have been before Vivian's therapy. She was genuinely happy for us and even offered to help with some of the preparations, though we kept her involvement limited to maintain healthy boundaries. The wedding itself was a celebration of not just our love for each other, but our family's journey toward health and healing. Vivian's speech as maid of honor was gracious and appropriate, focusing on her hopes for our happiness rather than her own feelings about losing Ethan's attention. "I used to think that loving someone meant never letting them go," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But I've learned that real love means wanting the best for someone, even when that doesn't include you in the way you originally hoped. Ethan and Chloe, you've taught me what healthy love looks like, and I'm grateful for that lesson." There wasn't a dry eye in the house, including mine. The woman standing at the podium was so different from the desperate, possessive person who had nearly destroyed our relationship. She'd done the hard work of healing, and it showed in every word she spoke. Our honeymoon was the first vacation Ethan and I had taken without any contact from Vivian. No emergency calls, no unexpected visits, no passive-aggressive messages about feeling left out. For 2 weeks in Italy, we were just a couple in love, exploring ancient cities and making memories without any family drama overshadowing our happiness. When we returned, Vivian had moved into her own apartment and was thriving in her new job at a nonprofit organization. She'd found purpose in helping other people work through family trauma, using her own experience to guide others toward healthier relationships. The distance, both physical and emotional, that therapy had created between Ethan and Vivian eventually evolved into a different kind of closeness. They developed a sibling relationship based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries rather than obsession and control. They could spend time together without the undercurrent of inappropriate tension that had characterized their interactions for so many years. Family gatherings became enjoyable again, something I'd honestly thought might never happen. We could all sit around the dinner table sharing stories and laughing without walking on eggshells or worrying about triggering Vivian's jealousy. The holidays that had once been minefields of emotional manipulation became genuine celebrations. Ethan's relationship with his parents also healed and strengthened through this process. Janet and David learned to see their children as individuals with separate needs rather than treating them as a unit that needed to be managed for optimal family harmony. They developed better boundaries themselves, refusing to be pulled into conflicts between their adult children. The experience changed how we approached relationships in general. We both became much better at recognizing unhealthy dynamics early and addressing them before they could escalate. We learned to trust our instincts when something felt wrong, even if we couldn't immediately articulate what the problem was. When we started having conversations about having children of our own, we talked extensively about how to raise kids with healthy attachment styles and appropriate boundaries. We didn't want to repeat the patterns that had led to Vivian's obsession, but we also didn't want to overcorrect and create distant, cold family relationships. The birth of our daughter, Lily, 3 years after our wedding, brought new dimensions to the family dynamics. Vivian's reaction to becoming an aunt was something we watched carefully, ready to intervene if her old patterns re-emerged with a new target. But her response was beautifully appropriate. She was excited and loving without being possessive or intrusive. She respected our parenting decisions, offered help when asked, and maintained healthy boundaries around her involvement in Lily's life. The transformation was complete and genuine. Watching Vivian hold our daughter for the first time was emotional for all of us. She was gentle and careful, speaking to Lily in soft, appropriate tones. There was love in her interactions, but it was the healthy kind of family love that nurtures without consuming. "She's perfect," Vivian whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to be amazing parents." In that moment, I could see the person Vivian had always been underneath the obsession and possessiveness. The therapy had stripped away the unhealthy coping mechanisms and revealed someone capable of genuine, appropriate love. Ethan's journey as a father was influenced by his experiences with family boundaries. He was naturally affectionate and involved with Lily, but he was also careful to encourage her independence and individual identity from an early age. He never wanted her to feel responsible for managing his emotions or sacrificing her own needs for his comfort. The bedtime stories he told Lily often featured themes of healthy relationships and appropriate boundaries, age-appropriate versions of the lessons he'd learned through our ordeal. He wanted her to grow up understanding that love should feel safe and supportive, not suffocating or controlling. As Lily grew, she developed relationships with all her family members, including Vivian, based on respect and genuine affection. Vivian was the fun aunt who taught her to paint and took her to museums, but she never tried to compete with us for Lily's primary affection or loyalty. The contrast between Vivian's relationship with Lily and her former relationship with Ethan was striking and served as evidence of how much growth and healing had taken place. She could love a family member deeply without needing to possess or control them. Our marriage continued to strengthen as we navigated the normal challenges of adult life, career changes, financial stress, parenting decisions, and all the other issues that test couples' resilience. The crisis we'd weathered early in our relationship had given us tools for handling conflict and stress that many couples don't develop until much later, if at all. We learned to communicate directly about problems instead of hoping they would resolve themselves. We established clear boundaries with extended family and friends, protecting our nuclear family from outside pressure and manipulation. Most importantly, we developed trust in each other's commitment to our relationship that couldn't be shaken by external challenges. The anniversary of the confrontation dinner became an unofficial family holiday for us, a day when we reflected on how far we'd all come and celebrated the hard work everyone had done to create healthier relationships. It wasn't a celebration of the pain we'd experienced, but rather an acknowledgement of the growth that had come from facing difficult truths. Vivian often used our story as an example in her work with other families dealing with boundary issues. With our permission, she would share how inappropriate attachment patterns could develop and be addressed through professional help and family commitment to change. Healing is possible, she would tell her clients, but it requires everyone involved to be willing to examine their behavior honestly and make difficult changes. It's not easy, but it's worth it for the chance to have genuine, healthy relationships. Her work became a source of purpose and fulfillment that filled the void left by her unhealthy attachment to Ethan. She was helping other people avoid the pain we'd all experienced while also making meaning from her own struggles. Looking back now, 7 years after that terrible dinner confrontation, I can honestly say that our family is stronger and healthier than it ever could have been if we'd continued to enable Vivian's inappropriate behavior. The crisis forced all of us to grow and change in ways that ultimately benefited everyone involved. Ethan developed confidence and boundary-setting skills that served him well in his career and all his relationships. He learned to trust his instincts and prioritize his own well-being without guilt. The people-pleasing tendencies that had enabled Vivian's control gradually gave way to healthy assertiveness. Janet and David became more aware parents and grandparents, better able to recognize and address problematic dynamics before they could escalate. They learned to support their adult children's independence rather than trying to manage their relationships for optimal family harmony. For me, the experience taught valuable lessons about trusting my perceptions and standing up for myself in difficult situations. I learned that being kind doesn't mean accepting inappropriate behavior, and that setting boundaries is an act of love rather than selfishness. Vivian's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. She went from being consumed by inappropriate obsession to living a fulfilling, independent life with healthy relationships. The therapy helped her understand the roots of her attachment issues and develop better ways of connecting with others. Our daughter Lily is growing up in a family that models healthy love and appropriate boundaries. She's learning that relationships should enhance your life rather than consuming it, and that love means supporting someone's growth and happiness rather than trying to control their choices. The scars from those difficult years are still visible sometimes. There are family photos where you can see the tension in our faces, holidays that we remember as stressful rather than joyful. But those reminders serve a purpose, helping us appreciate how much we've all grown and changed. Ethan and I sometimes talk about what might have happened if we hadn't confronted the situation when we did. Would Vivian's obsession have escalated further? Would our relationship have survived the constant pressure and manipulation? Would Ethan have been able to develop healthy adult relationships with anyone while managing his sister's inappropriate emotional needs? We'll never know the answers to those questions, but we're grateful we didn't have to find out. The intervention, though painful, prevented years of additional damage and gave everyone involved the chance to heal and grow. The most important lesson we learned is that love without boundaries isn't really love at all, it's possession, control, or obsession disguised as care. Real love requires respect for the other person's autonomy and growth, even when that growth takes them in directions you didn't expect or prefer. Today, our family gatherings are filled with genuine warmth and affection. Vivian brings her boyfriend, a kind man who treats her with respect and appreciation. Lily runs between all the adults, secure in the knowledge that she's loved appropriately by everyone. Ethan and I hold hands across the dinner table, grateful for the journey that brought us to this place of peace and stability. The woman who once saw me as a threat to her inappropriate relationship with her brother now calls me her sister by choice. We've built a friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to family health. It's not the relationship either of us expected to have, but it's genuine and meaningful in its own way. When people ask me how we survived such a difficult family crisis, I tell them that it required everyone involved to be willing to face uncomfortable truths and make difficult changes. It meant prioritizing long-term health over short-term peace, and being willing to endure conflict in service of genuine resolution. The process wasn't quick or easy, and there were times when we all wondered if the family would survive intact. But the commitment to healing and growth ultimately created something stronger and more beautiful than what we'd started with. Sometimes I think about that young woman I was 7 years ago, sitting in a movie theater while my boyfriend dealt with yet another crisis call from his sister. She had no idea what she was in for, but she also had no idea how strong she was or how much she was capable of handling. That girl thought love meant accepting whatever behavior came her way from family members, that setting boundaries was selfish, and that confronting problems would only make them worse. She's learned since then that the opposite is true, that real love requires boundaries, that self-respect is essential for healthy relationships, and that problems left unaddressed only grow larger and more destructive over time. Ethan and I are planning our 10-year wedding anniversary celebration now, and Vivian is helping us organize a surprise party. The woman who once couldn't bear to watch us together is now invested in celebrating our happiness. It's a transformation that still amazes me sometimes, proof that people really can change when they're willing to do the hard work of healing. Our marriage has weathered the test of family crisis and emerged stronger. We know we can handle whatever challenges life throws at us because we've already survived something that could have destroyed us. We've learned to communicate through conflict, support each other through difficult times, and maintain our connection even under pressure. The love story that began in a college bookstore has evolved into something deeper and more resilient than either of us imagined possible. We've built a life together that honors both our individual growth and our commitment to each other. And while the journey wasn't always easy, I wouldn't change a single part of it. Because sometimes the most beautiful relationships are forged in the fire of overcoming impossible challenges together. And sometimes the families that love each other the most are the ones brave enough to confront their own dysfunction and fight for something better. Today, I'm grateful for every lesson we learned, every boundary we established, and every difficult conversation that brought us closer to health and healing. The girl who once felt powerless against her boyfriend's sister's obsession has become a woman who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to protect it. And that, I've learned, is the most important love story of all, the one you write with yourself, about learning to value your own well-being enough to demand the respect and care you deserve. Everything else beautiful in life flows from that foundation.